Today's businesses find themselves in a quandary. As the business landscape has become more and more level, with less opportunities for businesses to differentiate themselves, companies are looking for ways to stand out from their competition. One of the ways they've done so is through the adoption of customer experience programs, methods and practices some companies are using to stay in touch with their customer base and other stakeholders in their organization as a means of improving their business and increasing their bottom line. Hello, my name is Duncan McGregor, Marketing and Communications Coordinator at Insightrix Research in Saskatoon, Canada, and your podcast host. In this episode, I'm happy to be joined by Jhumur Choudhury, our Senior Research Executive here at Insightrix, who's worked with many clients in the past to implement their customer experience programs. She'll be my co-host for this episode. We're also joined by Voice of Market consultant John Morton, an expert in the field of customer experience management, who will lend us the insight of his experience as we discuss best practices, emerging technologies, and why customer experience is so crucial in today's businesses. Closing the loop, relationship building, and bridging the gap between the boardroom and the front line. All that and more on this episode of Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix Podcast. We're here with my co-host for the episode, Jhumur Choudhury. She's a Senior Research Associate here at Insightrix who's worked with a lot of clients of ours and others to implement their customer experience program. How's it going today, Jhumur?
Good. How are you, Duncan?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for co-hosting with me here today. Just to jump into it, maybe we could just get a little bit of background on CX in general. Why is CX becoming so popular?
Good question. I'm really excited to talk about customer experience today. So, why is CX becoming important?
Yeah.
As we are entering into this age of equivalency, meaning that there is really very little blue ocean for truly differentiated products and services, the way companies can make a difference is through that experience of how they deliver that entire offering. Mm-hmm. So key to success is offering a service or a product that is of value to the customer, that's tailored to their needs, tastes, rather than one size fits all.
Very specific then.
Yeah, very specific. So in that way, you are creating a signature for your brand, but also you're delivering that little bit extra. Mm-hmm. And that's what customers want these days. But it's important to understand or anticipate their needs to make those tailor-made products and services. Yeah. So that is why a company needs to focus on customer experience. And if you think about it, Duncan, focusing on customer experience is a win-win in a lot of ways. Why? Because one effort is it does serve as your differentiator for your brand and it becomes a reason you start to stand out among your competition.
Yeah.
But secondly, there's absolutely no waste because you're doing it for your current customers and it becomes a loyalty and satisfaction enhancer. Lastly, if you are doing it in a creative way, it also becomes something that drives positive word of mouth. And we all know how vital it is to have a positive word of mouth referral because customers who are coming in through that positive word of mouth referral will spend 4 times more. Research tells us that because A, they refer 2x more customers and B, they spend twice as more. So getting your customer experience right is a win-win in a lot of ways. But then that's the question, what do customers expect? And based on all my work in this field, I think a customer's expectations are simple to understand but harder to fulfill than many people think.
Okay.
If you think about it, what do customers want? 4 basic things. They do not want unpleasant surprises. They expect easy access to service on their own terms. And they want first-time resolution to requests for assistance. And they require evidence that the company cares. However, meeting these expectations are difficult in a lot of ways, and you really need to have a good, solid customer experience program and measurement in place in order to fulfill these customer expectations. I guess today we can discuss how a company can get started. We are joined by John Morton.
Yeah, we're going to talk to John Morton. He's a Voice of Market consultant out of Toronto who's been nice enough to lend us his time. We're going to talk to him about customer experience programs and organizations that are using them. So let's get on the phone with John.
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right, and we're here with John Morton, a voice of market strategy consultant with Voice of Market out of Toronto. He's joining us by phone. Hi, John. How's it going today?
I'm very well, Duncan. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We're here also with our co-host for this episode, Jhumur. I believe you two know each other?
Yes, Jhumur and I have had the opportunity to work together both on some MRIA work and then a little bit of consulting that Voice of Market actually did with Insightrix on some customer experience management work.
Hi, John.
Hey, Jhumur. How are you?
Good. How are you?
So for our listeners who may not know you, could you give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you've been working in customer experience management?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I probably come into the customer experience management space a little bit differently than is the traditional norm. Academically, I come at it with degrees in business and law, and from a career experience point of view, I bring in some work on both the client and the consultant sides of the market. I started my career in very traditional marketing research at Procter & Gamble, working on concept and use and advertising, brand equity work, and had the opportunity from there to move into RBC Financial Group, and that was kind of where I first got exposed to customer experience management work. That was a really exciting time to be at Royal Bank. They were going through some really bold transformations in all of customer, employee, and brand, and as a person in their insights team, I had the opportunity to work on all three of those projects and areas before I moved over to supply side. So I kind of brought in a bunch of background knowledge on advanced analytics and multivariate statistics work from Procter, which worked really nicely into some of the work and understanding of the larger relationships that drive loyalty and that link employee and customer when I was at RBC Financial Group, and then kind of took that client-side experience into my consulting at Market Pro Canada. So Market Pro Canada is a research consultancy that specializes in customer experience at its core, but also brand experience and employee engagement work. And I led the business team in Canada for the last decade and a half, and I got some really kind of foundational work in helping organizations like RBC, like Microsoft, like Holt Renfrew, like Canada Post, AGF, Manulife, organizations of that nature kind of work through some of their customer experience work, setting up feedback programs and working through some of the organizational paradigm shifts that need to take place in order to try to drive customer centricity.
Well, there has been a lot of paradigm shifts, right, in this business over the last little while. Just to get the ball rolling, why CXP? Why customer experience? What sets a business or a firm apart with an established customer experience program from those that don't actually bother with them?
Well, great question. And certainly you're right, there has been a lot of change in this space, right? You know, the evolution from serve qual and the understanding of expectation versus experience gaps, and then customer satisfaction and customer value and customer loyalty, and a lot of that was about measurements and metrics, but I think the bigger shift that's gone on as organizations have kind of moved to a full understanding of customer experience management is this notion that this is not necessarily just about shareholders, it's about stakeholders, and customers and employees are stakeholders in a value chain. And there's obviously the financial benefits that organizations accrue from focusing on customers, and the link between strong customer experience and things like retention of business and growth of share of wallet, and even effectively client acquisition from word of mouth and advocacy. And so those are all, very things that one can quantify, and there's lots of examples out there in Forrester, Gartner, the Customer Experience Professionals Association, Bruce Temkin. All of those are kind of well-known names in the customer experience management space, where they've been able to show the linkage between strong business results and this focus on bringing the voice of the customer into the organization. I think, though, qualitatively, there is this notion of how you drive we mentioned earlier, paradigm shift, but a culture change that speaks to how organizations should think about customers as a stakeholder, and how do you, it's even manifesting itself in things like user design and design thinking and agile development. But this notion of putting the customer in front of things you do, and designing experiences around their needs all the way through the process from initial idea through to execution, rather than carefully set a focus on, hey, we can make this, who can we sell it to? Let's actually build things that let's build products and services that customers need, and then we'll develop relationships with them.
Yeah, what a concept. Yes. Making things people want and need.
Exactly.
Well, and having relationships. And of course, the there's another piece of that evolution and the paradigm shift, and I think it's this notion about how do we move beyond the functional to establishing emotional linkages, and because relationships are built on knowing that people care, not caring what you know, and so again that focus on customer needs and putting that at the front. The buzzword is customer centricity. How do you get the customer at the center of the radar screen? But I think what customer experience management does is it brings that voice of the customer much more actively into an organization's boardroom and helps kind of bridge the gap between the boardroom then and the vision there and the frontline individual employee behaviors that are actually delivering the customer experience.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was really detailed. You covered a lot of things here. You've talked about the company's brand. You talked about the experiences linking to the brand. You talked about the emotional linkages. You talked about the employee part of it. So it seems like it covers a wide area. So could you elaborate a bit about how a company starts with getting all these pieces together to start the program?
Sure, I can try to simplify that out. There's no doubt. I think customer experience as a practice or a discipline is a little bit different than some of the more traditional marketing research in that it does encompass a potentially very wide swath of activities. But I think at the core, it really is about getting some sort of voice of customer feedback into the organization, and whether that's driven from the top. Because it's got the right executive sponsorship and the right kind of strategic management system that is saying that the customer needs to be part of our decision-making process, or it's driven from the bottom up and it's maybe arguably even the tail wagging the dog, but bringing that voice into the business process and institutionalizing it there is really at the core of it, to my mind. Now, when I say feedback, that doesn't necessarily have to be core surveying. That is the traditional sense, but it can also be a variety of listening posts. It can also even be things, like secondary data. Big data obviously is the buzzword, and I see that as a process, not a thing. But again, that's a way of how do we take the data that we have and understand relationships in it to better drive our business. And social media is a listening post. Event-based surveys that focus very very close in time around interactions that an organization has with customers and bringing that as a regular feedback mechanism. I think linking the customer feedback and improvements in that to management systems and even pay for performance is one of the important shifts to show that management really cares about this, and this is going to be part of the incentive compensation of an organization because we believe it drives results, and ultimately even being able to show some of that linkage between the business results and the customer feedback system to show that as performance metrics and customers, whether it's NPS or LTR or some other sort of index, there's a whole variety of ways you can measure this, but or even just showing in with social media analytics that the preponderance of your feedback is more positive than negative, and how that's linked to business results over time. That's actually really the sort of system that an organization needs to set up.
Yeah, we were speaking earlier, actually, before we started taping, about NPS scores and how they are a crucial thing, but getting past just the number when it comes to customer experience management.
No, you're absolutely right, and so that's actually the management part, right? So NPS is a metric, and I personally, in my practice at Voice of Market, which kind of takes Jhumur, you mentioned this, right? Talking about employees and brands. I kind of take the view that if you are working on customer experience, you also implicitly need to be working on employee experience. And there are separate feedback mechanisms one can set up there, but effectively there is this link between brand promises and what an organization has taken to market and delivering those promises to customers. And of course, it's the employees that need to be enabled to deliver that promise. So when you work on and think about customer experience, you do think about employee experience, and that's that management piece. So it's not just about measuring, let's use an analogy, it's not just about sitting on a scale and measuring your weight. that's actually not going to create weight loss. You actually need to set up a process and plan to move that number. And this is where you start to get into the measures that are underneath measure like NPS, and do the appropriate modeling that shows that specific attitudes from customers and specific employee behaviors are actually linked to improving that NPS score. And then, of course, that NPS score is further linked to your business results in customer retention and growth of share of wallet.
For sure. So you mentioned customer, employee, drivers, attitudes, but I guess that before an organization goes ahead and implements that customer experience management program, they should start through some qualitative research, which you also mentioned, John, where they would actually try to understand what type of experience they want to deliver and what type of experience customers are looking from them, and then understand all the touch points. So can you talk a little bit more about the starting point of all those? Because branding and aligning employee and customers and experiences, it's a lot of, you have to have a process in place, as you mentioned. So what is the starting point of this process?
Yeah, fair enough, and great question. And I think the arc that any individual organization takes will probably need to be customized to them and where they are on their customer experience journey. But for sure, I think having starting with qualitative information, people talk a lot about journey mapping, and I think that's a very effective process, and it often involves qualitative research and ethnographic work. So you start with some understanding of segments of your customers. From that, you develop personas, and then you take these personas, which represent discrete customer groups that are likely to have a unique journey, and you work qualitatively to understand what the journey through the organization's products and services, from being initial onboarding as a customer and the start of a relationship through to maturity, and all the different kind of ways that the organization either, I like to say, does things either for the customer or does things to the customer. And having that background from a qualitative point of view, and that can involve focus groups, it can involve IDIs, it can involve actual in-context work where you're watching customers work through real live scenarios and observing what's going on. Yep. So from an ethnographic point of view, but all of that forms a foundation, I think, for this. It's a substrate of understanding that then you can take into your tracking. That kind of informs, so what is it we need to measure here? What are the moments of truth and the critical interactions that we can then move into a more quantitative research? So that assesses your why and your how, and then you move into quantitative and you get to assess your what and the degree to which certain experiences exist positively or negatively for the customers.
Yeah, we were actually talking about that qualitative aspect of this and how absolutely crucial it is.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right.
And in all the work which we do here in customer experience, we always see that clients who start right from the qualitative part of it, that's when it's easier to get into the quantitative phase, because we know exactly what to measure and what to track and how to take it one level further.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Jhumur. I think a lot of organizations want to leap into the quantitative measurement because then they can do linkage analysis, and they can hook that up to the secondary data, and they can do all the fancy analytics, because qualitative doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. Yep. But I think it very much is a situation where one needs to go slow and methodically up front, because then one can actually move a lot faster. It avoids that missteps and restarts as one has to recalibrate because one kind of missed a fundamental foundational piece that really needed to be understood. And the other thing about qualitative, let's not mistake it. It is a type of voice of customer, right? Yeah. This is actually an opportunity for not just the professionals in an organization who are trying to set up a program, but also a chance for frontline staff, for senior executive, for the people who are actually challenged with managing the experience positively on a day-to-day basis, to actually hear customers talk potentially at length about the experiences they're having and how they are, or perhaps are less than meeting their needs. And that the ability to kind of hear that live and customers talk about it in their own words and not have it distilled into a series of numbers is just monstrously beneficial in terms of driving a richer and deeper understanding of what customer needs are.
Yeah, and honestly, having the verbatims directly from your customer base, it's gold.
Yeah, and then that, having that actual voice of customer, continuing on with verbatim comments and building that into your measurement system the ability to kind of give that richer feedback, not just bounded by a rating scale or a question, is again an important piece of the work. And then, right, this is where then some of the newer techniques in linguistic and text analytics and ability to kind of suss out emotion using AI and those sorts of things all become powerful, and you can start to apply them as well.
Good point, because that is the most engaging and interesting part of the customer experience research, like digging down into those verbatim comments, analyzing it, text analytics, and trying to find the why behind that score.
Yes, absolutely, because the score is a what, for sure, right? It's a degree of measurement of a particular attitude or behavior. We're starting to verge into a bit of a discussion on storytelling and how you actually move organizations to action on these things. That's getting to the why and being able to hear things specifically in the customer's words is part of that storytelling. And, coming in with a bunch of numbers it can be a very, very flat delivery of what's going on. And to kind of lend color to that and depth, the customer verbatims are really important and can be a real aid to being able to tell good stories that will kind of take the intelligence you're bringing and inspire people to push it into action in their day-to-day jobs, right? So you can talk about driver analysis, and we've identified these things as key influencers, or you can tell them a story about a customer who had a particular issue and a series of employee behaviors that were able to resolve that. And the latter has much more influential power in terms of making the issue of customer experience come alive versus showing them a chart and some statistical coefficients and saying, therefore, go away and work on this.
Yeah, well, without understanding the story or the narrative of something, all you've got left is a number, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Does that make sense, Jhumur, what I was just saying?
For sure, that does make sense. That is one of the favorite part of customer experience analysis, that verbatim comments and the why. So going further, I guess, after the qual research, after getting equipped with all the insights for the measurement, why don't we discuss a little bit about the different sources of where we should put this feedback mechanisms in place, the surveys and the sources of feedback. What else should come into our voice of customer platform to give us insights?
Fair enough. I think there's probably, when I think about this, Jhumur, I think of it in kind of two sets of best practices. One is the best practices in the actual feedback or measurement system that you're putting together, and the other is kind of best practices in organizational development and the support that exists. In the former, the measurement system, there's lots of different types of data that can be brought to bear. Formal mechanisms from event-based surveying where you're tracking performance over time is a very common one and leads to very good operational ability to intercede and make correction. There's also broader, more strategic relationship-based surveys where you're trying to understand customer loyalty or the quality of the relationship at a macro level. What are all of the influences that an organization brings to bear in the customer relationship, and which of those are a competitive advantage or a competitive disadvantage for an organization? Where strategically should we be thinking about investing in developing relationships? And that's a little bit different than let's talk to customers who have had a specific type of interaction or gone through a specific event like onboarding, like opening a mortgage, like a retail transaction, and understanding specifically that process. Social media is another important source. Yeah. We talked earlier about personas and segmentation. I think being able to kind of deliver that customer experience measurement on a segmented basis, you can understand the needs of different customer groups rather than looking at them as one monolithic pile is actually important. The other set of best practices I mentioned was over on the other side around the organizational development, and this is very manifest to how do you take all of this good information you've developed and actually turn it into intelligence that the organization can digest and use. And, so we're talking about governance frameworks and pay-for-performance systems and appropriate executive sponsorship, the systems of reporting and feedback within the organization so that people are paying attention to these results. And, you're not just growing a whole pile of fruit that you're never going to pick and actually use on your customer experience tree.
Well, that's actually something I wanted to talk to you about, too.
Sure.
All this customer experience measurement results in a great deal of data, all kinds of different data. You got quant data, you got qual data. How do you actually take that and, I guess you'd say, synthesize it into actionable information?
More easily said than done. I'll start with that. This is the big quandary of our time, maybe, is that there is no shortage of data out there to choose from, and people are, for the most part, overwhelmed. And so I think this is where having not just collecting data, but collecting data with a framework and thinking about actually how you're going to use it. I think good research is driven by having a proper understanding of information objectives and also a proper understanding of expected use of results. So you shouldn't be generating data that you actually don't know already how the organization is going to use it. And this is part of that initial setup and the paradigm shift that people know what they do with their monthly financial statements and their sales reports and their operational KPIs. And so you need to think about the customer experience feedback and the voice of customer information coming in the same way, that you're not just going to generate a bunch of data and then hope that people use it. It needs to kind of sit into a framework and system. And so this is where some of that governance comes in. This is where kind of getting buy-in in the organization, that people are going to look for this data and they're going to put it up against all the other KPIs, and it is another KPI that they can look at. And then, of course, how do you bring it to life in a meaningful way that kind of drives, reality of the customer experience into the business? This is, going back to that storytelling piece that we were talking about earlier. But I think there is, it becomes part of an information framework or an intelligence framework, probably a better choice of words. And so this information is part of the ongoing intelligence that is part of the system that the organization uses to understand whether its business is progressing in the manner it wants it to, A, and B, helps identify areas of intervention when it isn't going the way it should be.
And I'll just add to that in the sense that for all the different areas of the organization to buy into that customer experience framework, it almost seems like the experience framework needs to be defined in a way that it speaks the language of each of those silos or departments. They no longer work in silos, but each of those departments or areas see an advantage for themselves and by customer experience. John, do you want to elaborate a bit more on how to get those different areas of the organization which this customer experience measurement program will touch through all those data? How can they see the benefit and use the data? And how does CX speak that common language of the organization?
There is a tension, I think, that exists in the information, right? The way that customers experience products and services and servicing from an organization is not always the same way that they're built internally or produced by the organization. And so the way that you collect your voice of customer feedback is not always matched exactly to how the business runs itself. Mm-hmm. And so there's a couple of things there. One is you need to kind of be able to understand the process that the business operates. As a CX consultant or a customer experience consultant, you need to be able to understand that, because it's partly that consultant's role to help translate from the customer experience into the business process, if you will, and be able to bridge that gap and say, this is happening here with the customers, but this is where it's occurring and what the source of either the success or the failure is within the business. We mentioned qualitative research, and we talked about doing that externally. There's also an internal qualitative process that I think needs to understand. That's part of the education on customer experience and this view that customers' feedback matters and this notion of driving customer centricity. It's also a way to get alignment and buy-in from the organization along the way, figure out what obstacles and obstructions exist. And then it's also a way to educate the organization about get employee feedback on their view of how the organization is delivering a customer experience, understand what the process is, and then educate across the different employee groups or business units and business structures so people understand that customer experience is not a phenomenon that's managed in only one area of the business. It's actually something that needs to be managed across the entire business, that every part of the organization from top to bottom and from left to right or east to west, whatever analogy you like, is responsible for contributing to customer experience. And so that internal qualitative has a variety of roles and is another one of those, I'll say, kind of foundational steps along with the external qual to get a view of the landscape and then make sure that when this information comes in, it's going to be well used by the organization.
So yeah, it seems that a customer experience measurement program is like far-reaching. It has many components. One thing which we hear working with clients always, and also on our end we implement it all the more, is technology. Like the customer experience program is heavily using technology to get the sorts of input that would give them the actionable insights. So John, do you want to talk a little bit about how technology fits into this customer experience measurement framework?
Happy to do that. And a great question, because it's certainly a very topical matter for people to ask about. So obviously, it's trite to say technology has really transformed the insight space. I think there's two things I might want to mention here. One is the impact of technology and digital on the customer experience itself. Not just customer experience management, but how that actually has impacted how customers shop, how they buy, the way that organizations interface with customers, and the challenges that actually create for organizations in developing relationships. Technology tends to drive people to a much more transactional and often not face-to-face and maybe even faceless type of interaction with an organization, and so the development of the emotional ties there that drive relationships can be kind of tough. So I think as part of that exploration we talked about early on, understanding the impact of digital and social and the technologies and mobile technologies, all those things are relevant to think about in terms of your measurement, but they're also relevant to think about in terms of how they impact the customer experience directly and change how organizations need to think about delivery and execution and all of the different places where failure can emerge. And quite honestly, what it has done is it's expanded the places of failure. In terms of thinking about the customer experience and measuring it, technology has two aspects, I think: analytics and reporting. And people talk about people, process, place, and then they roll in a fourth one, technology. I tend to think of technology more as an enabler or a disenabler around people, process, and place. And so that's relevant to what we just talked about in the customer experience, but it's also a way to kind of think about getting to better and richer information. And from an analytic point of view, obviously AI and deep learning and computing power in general has really changed the way the data is used. Big data is really a process that is enabled by computing speeds of technology, and you layer in deep learning and AI and the ability to understand underlying relationships in data and link behavioral data, hard data to attitudinal data. That's a huge piece of text analytics and neurolinguistics, and the ability to kind of pull out emotional pieces and just the volumes of data that you can work with. You mentioned, how does an organization get started? I think getting started as quickly as you can, so you can start to accumulate your data, so that then you can take advantage of analytics and looking at relationships over time is really important. The other part is, of course, the use of technology to drive information into an organization, and it's a bit of an old-fashioned term now, but I think it's still relevant: enterprise feedback management and EFM systems, and how you combine that into an organization's existing structure, and the use of data visualization and linking your external data to your internal data, technology, and the ability to kind of give that both mobile and central. All of those are really important considerations about ensuring that organizations both get the information they want, but have it in the way that they want it, that they can best use it. And so technology has been a huge lift there. There's been lots of advantages, and use of infographics as an example, and data visualization to aid with storytelling and make it easier to digest mass amounts of information. All of those are a far cry from the charts and tables that existed as the way to deliver information 15 years ago when customer experience was called customer sat. So there's all of those aspects of it that I think are very relevant.
So, wrapping up, you've given us a lot to think about. I want to thank you for being on. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? I know we've covered a lot of ground here, but with something as broad-ranging as CX, I want to make sure that close to every bridge gets crossed, if you know what I mean. So,
no, fair enough. So first of all, I'll say, thank you for having me on. It has been a great conversation. Really appreciate the opportunity to kind of contribute to the podcast, and thanks for your great questions. I guess, maybe, one of the things that I'll suggest, kind of, critical success factors is, I think, the need to engage employees all across an organization, I think is really important when you're trying to drive success of a customer experience program. And that's the frontline employees, that's the executive, that's the middle managers in the background who are kind of running building the processes that kind of enable the frontline managers. I think there is this notion of communication and transparency that builds trust. Because this can be scary, right? This involves a change, and change is often scary for people. And so, clear communication about objectives and goals and how this is about advancing the organization and extending everybody's ability to do their job better is a really important part of it. Another word that I like to think of as a critical success factor is integration. I think, a lot of the things we've been talking about, analytics, reporting, qualitative, quantitative, internal data, external data, the notion there really about how to get to success is how to integrate those well and pull them together. There is a broad swath of things, and I think the right solution doesn't come from any one, but it often comes from combining some of these techniques and methods and available information sources in ways that are most helpful for the organization. And then the last one that I'll say is, it's probably more important to get started than it is to continue talking about starting. Start small. Pick a point of pain or pick a point of success, but pick something within the organization and get going on it, and then use that as a model for cascading this out within the broader organization. Too much time is spent, I think, often managing the score and talking about the measurement, and not enough time getting down to actually just doing it and managing the actual store rather than the score. And so, pick a place, assemble a team, start your internal qualitative, mobilize that for your external qualitative, and then push forward with some concrete measures that you can then use and link into the ongoing management system. And you'll start to see the results that you can then proudly trumpet to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Yeah, there you go.
The most important thing is just jump in and get going on it, right?
Yeah, that's good. I hadn't heard that expression. I like that, Duncan.
Yeah. Well, I think it gets back also to what you were talking about, intentionality too, right? When you're setting up, you have to have a really good idea of what you want out of it.
Exactly.
And ultimately getting going is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for being on our little podcast. I really appreciate it.
No, not at all. Thank you for the opportunity to join you and Jhumur today. Jhumur, thank you for your great questions. Really appreciate it. And again, and anytime you'd like to chat, I'm happy to come back.
Awesome. Thanks again.
All right. Take good care.
That was great, hey Jhumur? A lot to learn there.
Yes, for sure. A lot of areas covered.
Right. Well, I want to say thanks to John right away, but did you have any key takeaways from our conversation that you wanted to share?
For sure, Duncan. There were quite a few, so I'll start at the beginning. Part which I want to mention is the importance of having that qualitative part before you implement the customer experience survey.
Okay.
Like, the journey mapping, as we call it in the customer experience world. Making sure that there is good qualitative research to have the customer's journey mapped, both internally and externally, is critical for implementation of a good customer experience program. The internal journey mapping is having workshops with the employees and looking at the already existing sources of data and understanding what are the anecdotal personas, understanding what are the critical touch points where customers interact with your company. All this is critical information for the consultant to implement a successful customer experience program.
Yes,
so
for sure.
we make sure we have a good qualitative session for the internal journey mapping. Then the external journey mapping, which are focus groups with your customers, just to understand their needs, their wants, how they perceive their company. All those are critical input for designing the survey, both at the relational level and the transactional level. That leads us to the second thing which John mentioned, was making sure that the customer experience program, from the survey, we make sure we collect information at different levels. For example, a customer comes in touch with your company through their day-to-day interaction, right? That's a post-transactional survey, and you implement it across all relevant channels to make sure that you're delivering the type of experience you want to deliver through those channels. And you know those type of experience because you've done a detailed journey mapping at the beginning.
Yeah.
So you measure that there. But at the same time, you do want to have this overall measure of how the customers perceive you, right? As John mentioned, because you need to tie everything together. Your brand, your delivery of your customer experience. So that's where the relational survey comes into play, which is less frequent than a post-transactional survey. Maybe twice a year, measure that, and you understand the customer's perception of the company.
Okay, sort of how they feel about you, your product, and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that being said, though, what do you measure in the surveys? That's another key point. John did mention that the matrix, the NPS. NPS is obviously Net Promoter Score is a very popular metric, and most of us are familiar with it.
Yeah.
But I mean, just understanding what metric really gives value. Net Promoter Score is good, but we can also incorporate matrix which suits the needs of the company, which has both the behavior of the customer and the emotion of the customer. Because if you combine the behavior and the emotion into your metric, behavior mean will you purchase again, things like that.
Yeah, stuff they'll do.
Yeah, and emotion is like, how you feel about the company,
how they
recommend.
feel.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So, and combine that into a metric, that's a solid metric to measure. But no matter what metric you measure, the key takeaway from John's conversation is really to understand the why behind the score.
Right.
That is critical.
Yeah.
And so for me, the most exciting and important part of a customer experience measurement program is indeed that verbatim analysis.
Okay.
Like track your customers verbatim to understand why they are rating you in a particular way, what they want from you. That's the key. So you can do it in a variety of ways. For example, we collect both in our surveys. We have lots of open-ended comments to explain the how. You can also track open-ended comments from like the call center calls that are coming in. The text analytics, the voice analytics, text analytics, but like what customers are writing about you on social media. Make sure that all those comments are tracked and themed and
social media sentiment nowadays is very important.
It's all critical. So make sure that technology, the proper voice analytics, text analytics technology is supporting your customer experience program.
Gotcha.
I'll give you an example because, like, for example, we all do driver analysis in a customer experience program to understand which factor is driving the overall metric.
Yeah.
Yes, but we all know that issues being resolved is a key driver of satisfaction.
Yeah.
But if you look at how much people are satisfied with the resolution of issues and try to track down the reasons why, you'll see that time is an important factor in the resolution of issue.
Yeah, for sure,
example,
right?
like if customers are on hold for a long time on the phone, that impacts the satisfaction with resolution of issues, which impacts the perception of the company. So all those nuances are very important to track.
Yeah, you can resolve my issue all you want, but if you take 2 days to do it, I'm not going to be happy with your company.
Then the other thing is capturing emotions. It's beyond just understanding the why. I mean, the primary reason to capture emotions in a customer experience program is to account for the human nature element in developing an organization's action plan. For example, if a customer has a negative experience, is that emotion associated with fear, anger, alarm, frustration, grief? That's important to understand for you to tailor-make what feelings or emotions you want to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And through advanced platforms now, you can actually do advanced emotive analytics and link it to your overall metric, be it NPS, be it anything. And that gives you powerful feedback.
Cool.
So that's something I really wanted to talk about.
Some of the technology that's involved in that kind of thing. It is, I imagine, quite replete with technology when it comes to analytics. Is there some of the analytics that we use here at Insightrix that you can think of?
We do. Actually, we have quite a variety of offering in our listening and learning platform, as we call it, in the customer experience program management. One is it is a survey platform for both your relational transactional data. On that same platform, we can integrate all the operational data for your company. And
so it goes well beyond text analytics then.
So you have all in one place. Text analytics, we use a platform called Scribe, where we do all the open-ended analysis and we make sure we always link that to understand the why behind all those metrics and scores. So we use a platform for that. We also have a platform which we use for emotive analytics, which is our heartbeat platform. So we do that to understand. But at the same time, the thing is that we give our client an overall view, like all in one place, our platform. Also in terms of the way closing the loop, as we call it. For example, if while they're completing a survey, they have an issue where they want the company to get in touch with them, our system can auto-generate the trigger and it will go as an email to the client, and the client can get in touch with the customer to close the loop. And that is really important because that conveys to the customer about the fact that the company cares. It's beyond just surveying. The other thing which is becoming very important is online communities, which online communities is like a group of customers who you have, who provides feedback to you in a regular fashion, a regular basis. So we have our own platform, which is our online community. So we do put together a group of customers for the company who who we send out regular surveys to, and the purpose of the surveys is varied. I mean, from our regular customer experience program, you understand the matrix and the why, where the company is performing versus not performing, or where the areas for improvement. But in order to deep dive into that, to understand or even co-create or get new product ideas, service ideas, that's where an online community is becoming increasingly critical. We've seen that with international players like Starbucks and stuff, how they use their online community to generate ideas.
When you can co-create with your own customer base, that is unbelievably valuable.
It is, and they're also your advocates in the long run, because you have that small group of customers. So that's becoming increasingly important. So listening and learning programs. So when a company, I would like to end by saying, when a company gets their CX right, it goes way beyond just an NPS or a CSAT score. It
really does, right? It's
all about knowing and understanding your customer and designing an experience so well that you're almost anticipating their needs.
Well, that's really great, Jhumur. I think ultimately it comes down to being able to find out what your customer wants from you and being able to provide it. And being able to do that through a proper voice of customer program is probably the most invaluable thing your organization can have at this point. You were talking about the importance of verbatims, and I see that you've collected a comment there that's actually quite fun. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, for sure, Duncan. Yeah, the reason I had this comment was that, this is ultimately the goal of your customer experience. It's this is a fun comment, which is like, it reads something like this. The reply is, I love you and I don't care what you sell. I know I'll buy from you. Boots, boats, bananas, whatever. I know you'll take care of me.
Wow.
So, that's what you can get if a customer experience program is in place, because then essentially your experience becomes your brand.
Exactly. And ultimately, once again, we're just catering to the needs of the customer. And what better way to find out than asking them themselves, right?
Exactly.
Well, this has been really great, Jhumur. I really want to thank you for coming onto the podcast today and helping me co-host this. Given us a lot to think about. And honestly, with a subject as important as CX and customer experience programs, it was really great to have you on the show to co-host with me. With your experience, this has just been awesome.
Thanks, Duncan. It was fun.
Well, hopefully we have you on again soon. So, yeah, thanks again. And there you have it. We'd like to thank John Morton for taking the time out to chat with us about customer experience programs. And I'd also like to thank Jhumur Choudhury for acting as this episode's co-host. If you'd like any information about Insightrix customer experience programs, check out our podcast webpage. We'll have a link there that'll take you to a white paper that may help fill in any of the blanks that we may have missed on this podcast episode. And we've got some great news for our long-time listeners. The podcast is now listed on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, which means that you can now subscribe and be sure to never miss an episode. If you like the podcast, please be sure to rate us, subscribe, or leave a review. Or all three. It'll help us get our podcast found by others like yourself who have an interest in great content related to market research. And of course, we'd like to thank you, our listeners. We'll be back in about another 6 weeks with another episode of Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix Podcast.